We've got everybody checked in and ready to
Go
roll.
ahead, you're open to both.
3,
Put it over to the slate now.
2, 1. Take camera 1. Go, Matt.
I'm Matt Murray. I'm the executive editor of The Washington Post.
Welcome to The Washington Post. I'm David J. Lynch.
I'm Akilah Johnson.
Thank you to The Washington Post for having me on this The Ship series.
Between Facebook, X, YouTube, Washington Post Live itself, we are now reaching hundreds of thousands of homes across all 50 states.
The power of this platform is it takes people into the world of ideas.
Audience members of Washington Post Live are part of the conversation.
I would like to ask the audience, how many of you knew before today's event that heart disease was the #1 killer of women? Okay, just me.
And this is this generation's charge. It is to disrupt. I completely agree with that, but it's also to build.
Now, this panel, I think, was originally called, 2 women against Putin. It really should be 3 women against Putin.
So it's got to be okay to maybe shake up the status quo a little bit.
This is a roar for change. There's no question.
I think Washington Post Live offers journalists like me a new way to do our job.
Their work is hugely important.
A new way to connect with our audience.
I'm an AI-generated version of Reid Hoffman, his digital twin.
Hello, Senator Schumer. Welcome to the Washington Post. This is going to be fun.
A new way to deepen our engagement with people who care about the Washington Post and our mission of gathering news.
We are in Arkansas and part of the Heartland region, which comprises about 22 states.
If we're going to win this, we have to start manufacturing this in the United States.
When I woke up after the election in 2016, my social media was filled with messages of people saying, Olivia Pope, you have to fix this.
We're very much a part of our own audience, so we've always built the show that we wish we had.
And their individuality comes through more so than just their titles.
We make fun of each other a lot.
We make fun of each other.
Constantly.
We do. So, and we make fun of others, but...
You're really getting a Bachelor of Science degree in character development and leadership because you are immersed in it every day.
The value of failure is the thing that happens often before success.
Even though we are competitive on the court, we are more importantly collaborative when people see us as a unit.
That was a vitally important conversation and one I think we all wish could last longer.
Senator Cassidy, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Paige.
I cannot thank you all enough.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Post. My name is Vineet Khosla. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Washington Post, and I'm delighted all of you can join us today for this event. We often compare the current AI revolution to the advent of the internet. But to all of us in the news and media industry, this feels closer to the moment when printing press was invented. Because what we see in real time is AI fundamentally changing how we create, how we distribute, and how we consume news and journalism. For us, this pace of change feels really, really fast. It is also why Washington Post launched about a year ago Ask the Post AI, our independent AI answer engine that is based on Washington Post's news and journalism. In the coming days and weeks, we are going to create a lot of products on AI, including the fact that you can start to talk to it, you can create your own custom podcast based on your interests and likes, everything based on trusted, verified, independent journalism. Our audience has shown a great appetite in adopting a lot of these products, telling us they want to explore new ways to consume our journalism. But this moment is more than just technology and journalism. We feel AI can also redefine work, it can redefine education, health, and maybe even our own understanding of ourselves. Today's event explores a lot of those questions, but we explore them with a global lens. What does it mean for America to remain a continued technology leader? How fast is China gaining us in the world of AI? And also, we want to answer important questions. how does the rest of the world get AI even in places where electricity and Wi-Fi are still not fundamentally available all the time? Our lineup today includes top leaders from IMF, from Google, from venture capital world, from the United Nations, academia, and even the Vatican. With that, I want to thank the University of Maryland for sponsoring today's summit. I hope to hear more from their leaders how they view AI changing higher education. I also want to thank NASDAQ for hosting us in this wonderful space. And I hope at the end of the day today, we leave with a better understanding of this changing world. After a short video, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, David Ignatius, who will kick off the proceedings. Thank you and welcome.
Meeting called to order.
So we have growth at around 3%. It used to be 3.8. And here is the good news. AI can lift growth up by 0.8%. Who benefits is not determined only by whether you were born in a more developed country or not. It is determined by the kind of job you hold.
So, hello everyone. I'm David Ignatius, a foreign affairs columnist at the Washington Post. Thank you all for joining us on what is a very busy day, even by New York standards. I'm pleased to be joined today by the IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, who's led the IMF since 2019, who began her second term last year. I've had the pleasure of talking with Kristalina often over the years, and I'm especially pleased to have her here. Kristalina, let's start with the obvious question for our session today, which is the fundamental impact of AI on the global economy. You at the IMF issued what I would call a groundbreaking report last year, in which you predicted that AI would affect almost 40% of the jobs in the world and 60% of the jobs in the advanced world. I want to ask you, a year later, how that prediction looks and what you're beginning to sense about the world's ability to adjust to those enormous changes.
Thank you for having me here. Last time we were on a screen, the last time before it on a screen, much nicer to be in person.
I agree.
We have been analyzing both the enormous advantage of artificial intelligence for an economy that has been growing very slowly, as well as the risks that are being created. On the side of the advantages, we have been underwhelming in terms of growth. On one level, I would say the world economy growing at 3%. This is not so bad. It has proven to be very resilient. But historically, the 2 decades before the pandemic, growth was on average 3.7%. So what can artificial intelligence do? It can give us back this missing 1%. Our analysis shows that there is a very high probability that increase in productivity, which is what we have been lacking. The fact that the economy is so sluggish is because productivity has not been growing. That can be compensated by artificial intelligence. And the early signs are that indeed there are productivity gains. I see it in my own organization that are certainly very encouraging for a world that needs to grow faster if we are to meet the aspirations of people. You mentioned the 60% in advanced economies, 40% on average. It actually goes down to 26% in low-income countries, jobs that are impacted by artificial intelligence, either enhanced or diminished or eliminated altogether. What we are seeing is that this is happening, and it is likely to be happening faster with investments in artificial intelligence, especially in advanced economies. So this is like a tsunami hitting the labor market. And the question is, are we ready for it? You mentioned the report we published. It has a very interesting component. We decided to rank countries on how well they're prepared for the tsunami. And we came up with very interesting result. We looked at digital infrastructure, labor markets, skills, innovation and how it transmits in the economy, and regulation and ethics. We have on top only advanced economies. We have at the bottom only low-income countries, mostly conflict-affected countries. And the distance between the best and the laggards is an accordion open very wildly. So you can decide to be an optimist and say, oh, well, low-income countries, they're not going to be hit by the tsunami so much. But then you think about the productivity gain, what is going to happen to these economies in comparative terms. So the story of artificial intelligence as it shapes up now is one of three pieces. First, overwhelming dominance of financial flows in the United States. Last year, 75% of venture capital in AI was invested here. This year, I'm told it is now up to 86%. So there is this very, very powerful sucking sound of capital going into the United States, creating a lot of excitement. I'll come up later on the risk that may be coming. Second, it is a story in which the relative preparedness seems to be higher on the physical infrastructure side and lower on the ethics and regulation side.
Let me just break in to ask about one
Sorry,
implication.
I didn't mean to overwhelm.
It's the
It's
AI.
just a very interesting story. Cannot sit
I hope
tight.
everybody in the audience remembers the AI tsunami description, because that's a powerful one. But the IMF worries every day and has since its beginning about the gap between the better off countries and the worse off countries. And as you just described the world we're heading into, I worry about a much more radical break between the advanced and less advanced countries. And I worry about AI deserts in the world. You know, this tsunami changing, empowering, hopefully enriching, but maybe missing parts of the world. Speak about that, the problem of the divide.
The risk is real. When you think about the fundamentals for artificial intelligence, you start from digital infrastructure and access to electricity. Half of the population in sub-Saharan Africa has no access to electricity. So if you want to get the power of your phone, well, you have to power the phone first. And that is a problem that my dear friend Ajay Banga at the World Bank is absolutely determined to focus on. They have a program to bring access to electricity to 300 million people in Africa. This is half of those that do not have access today. So the investments in basic infrastructure, and then of course investments in education and skills in human capital, they are falling behind on everything, but they're also impacting the ability to make progress on artificial intelligence. Could that be accelerated, this progress be accelerated? Yes, but if you look at the speed with which advanced economies are moving in the world of artificial intelligence, I worry that the risk is more of the divide deepening. We also have occasionally some positive signs when young people in developing countries come up with brilliant ideas and they solve problems. By the way, one thing that I have observed with great admiration is that in developing countries, entrepreneurs are much more likely to concentrate on using artificial intelligence to solve the problems of their communities, access to clean water, ability to transmit knowledge to remote communities. So there is that element, but on the broader spectrum, it is still, the risk is more tilted towards the divide deepening. How can we help countries? For our advice to developing countries, to emerging markets, to low-income countries is concentrate on these two key impediments for you. Basic digital infrastructure, and please make it public digital infrastructure. You make it private, you suffocate your chances to catch up. And concentrate on skills. One of the good things about artificial intelligence is that it actually accelerates knowledge transfer. Focus on that. Don't think first and foremost about profitability. Think about your ability to be part of this AI story.
So one of the things that the IMF worries about is global financial stability. And with the enormous levels of investment that we're seeing in AI, this sort of desperate scramble among investors and companies to build the infrastructure. You know, this morning you read of the $100 billion investment that is contemplated in OpenAI by NVIDIA. You see estimates of $3 trillion over time in this sector. And you begin to wonder about, not about the AI boom, if you're a journalist, but about the AI bust, about the danger of financial instability caused by this enormous wave of investment. What do you think, Christine?
So, two things. One thing we need to cherish is that there is access to AI because of OpenAI everywhere in the world. And that is something that should be encouraged even more. I spoke about public digital infrastructure, but also access to knowledge, the ability of poor people in poor countries, like people in wealthy countries, to access OpenAI. That's really tremendously important also for the benefit of rich countries, because if the developing world falls behind, that's a loss of opportunity for investments and growth globally. I am paid to worry. My job is macroeconomic and financial stability, growth, and employment. So yes, that was the third point I was going to make. We do worry that there is an explosive increase in financing in artificial intelligence. It is highly concentrated in a small number of companies. We are all hype on this is going to raise productivity. What if it doesn't? And then we all have painful memories from dot-com times. Then we can have a bubble bursting with very significant implications. Now, how do you manage this? Well, we advocate for diversifying these investments. Don't concentrate them in one place. Don't concentrate them in a small group of companies. seek ways in which there can be transmission line that would reduce that risk. And two, we are going to have in the next panel somebody who comes from the faith, from the Catholic faith, and I would suggest that the second thing we can do is pray.
That's direct from the managing director of the IMF, folks. So you and I were talking before we came out about trade. And one of the mysteries about an AI world is what effect this super connected, super intelligent soon world will mean for trade, and what exactly will be trading in this world. You've made some counterintuitive remarks about the trade situation we're living in. So maybe you'd speak briefly about that, the tariff world, and then talk about AI and trade.
Well, so the counterintuitive was that so far what is happening in the world of trade is not as dramatic and scary as we thought it might be. Why? First, because the country that is now more actively imposing tariffs on trading partners, the United States, while nominally has raised tariffs to a very high level, the average is 18%. In fact, effective tariffs, we calculate them, and we are still working on the numbers, so do not quote this number as the final truth, but we are calculating effective tariffs around 9%. So it is half as bad as it looks at first sight. Of course, I have to immediately clarify that before April 2nd, US effective tariffs were slightly under 3%. So it is a massive increase. But what is very interesting is what the rest of the world is doing. So far, the rest of the world is not emulating this behavior. On the contrary, we see an increase in bilateral and plurilateral trade agreements, the EU with India, the EU with Indonesia, the EU with Latin America, Mercosur, and also countries in neighborhoods like the ASEAN countries saying, wait a minute, we don't trade among ourselves as much as we should. So we see that interest of regional trade spiking because the reliance on global trade as the engine of growth is not as strong today. Will this last? And what can be done to prevent a slippery slope in trade is a very important question, and one that, as you can imagine, we dedicate time to show what are the benefits of plurilateral arrangements, to recognize it is a multipolar world. What does that mean for trade? And I want to say something that is really important. If we want to have a benefit of higher productivity from AI, but also from other technological factors, that is lifting up the world economy as a whole, we have to work hard to retain the integrated global economy, even if it is not global economy as we knew it before. And frankly, I don't think that we're going to go back to where we were, but it is one in which we benefit from comparative strength, from comparative advantage. And we recognize that when you are richer, I would be better off because whatever I produce would have a bigger market. So let me ask the audience, how many of you think that a world in which that is more collaborative and integrated is more profitable for everybody? Let me see. Thank you, audience. Thank you very much.
So what could an IMF managing director want more than that poll? So my colleague David Lynch, who is the chief economics writer for the Washington Post, just published a book called "The World's Worst Bet: How the globalization gamble went wrong and what would make it right." And his basic point isn't that globalization had a negative effect, but that the consequences for the losers were not adequately addressed. It's not that overall we are better off, but the people who are worse off just didn't get the help. They didn't get the adjustment assistance. We're facing another shock, maybe even bigger than globalization. How do we prevent the same thing from happening?
First, I want to say that I wholeheartedly agree with that. I actually, personally, I have been talking about the fact that on average, we may be collectively better off, but if the benefits are not distributed fairly, sooner or later there would be consequences. Actually, my professor of statistics used to say about averages: you can put your head in the refrigerator, your feet in the oven, your temperature is average, but you are dead. And a little bit of this has happened with globalization, I'm afraid. And this is why I'm so passionate about thinking of how to bring the benefits of technological transformation, especially of artificial intelligence, faster to people within countries, within societies, and across countries. And that is where what you do here is so admirable, because we need that conversation to be inclusive, to be global.
So we have an audience question. It's pre-packed, so I'm just gonna read it. It's from Karen Aguirre from Virginia, and she asks, what is your advice, Madam Managing Director, for high school seniors as they think about how to select universities and position themselves for the workforce of the future, which obviously is going to be very different from the one that you and I entered?
The number one feature I would recommend to look at is how open and agile curricula are, how much the university, to put it very simply, prepares people to think of the unthinkable. Because the unthinkable will happen. How do you manage, how do you build this muscle to find a path in high uncertainty? If you look at the last years, this has been time of exceptional uncertainty, and it is not going away. Actually, the conversation about artificial intelligence, it is a new element of uncertainty. So being able to have foresight when the fog is very thick. How do you develop this? How do you develop your ability to engage with like-minded and not like-minded? Those who are actually, you passionately disagree with them. I would look for that kind, not so much of course, the actual knowledge, and there would be sectors of the economy that would be more advantageous than others. That comes without saying. But universities, schools, universities, they have to prepare us for a much less predictable labor market of tomorrow. And that means build that capacity, build that mental muscle to sort out your way in uncertainty. I also would say look for universities that help you build confidence. And that, I think, is going to come with a premium. I know that there are premier institutions where they want to show you how much you don't know because they want to motivate you to learn. That's all very good, but I think we need our young people, they need to grow with a sense of believing in themselves believing in the ability to engage with others and the ability to shift course from one career stream to another quickly.
So we have less than a minute left, and a sensible moderator would close it here, but I'm going to ask one more question. And so you and I are going to meet here 5 years from now for another one of these sessions. And I'm going to ask you, Kristalina, I want you to sum up in one sentence what the last 5 years ended up being in terms of AI and the impact on the global economy. And you'd say in one sentence, 5 years from now, what?
A wealthier world, and I hope I'll be able to say a more inclusive camaraderie world. So that is my aspiration. What I would exactly say, we have a date 5 years from now, right here.
Deal. So this is a treat. I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I did. Please join me in thanking you.
Thank you.
So my Washington Post colleague, Susanna George, will join us now with a global panel offering perspectives from Europe, Asia, and Africa. Thank you again for joining this session.
Thank you.
The digital divide is still real. Yeah. And it's becoming an AI divide, a compute divide, but the root cause is the digital divide.
We must prevent a world of AI haves and have-nots.
The commitment that myself and the Catholic Church is pushing on AI ethics is simple, centered, and focused to one thing: to ensure that the human being is the center and remain at the center of such kind of evolution and development.
Our future is digital, and we have been hard at work over the past 2 years to ensure that it's open, safe, and secure, and that it leaves no one behind.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Susanna George, an international correspondent here at the Washington Post, and I'm excited to be joined on stage by Father Paolo Bonatti. He served as Pope Francis's AI ethics advisor and continues to advise the Roman Catholic Church on AI. Kate Callott, she's the CEO of Amini, a Nairobi-based climate tech startup leveraging AI and data infrastructure, and Amandeep Singh Gill, the UN Undersecretary General Envoy for Digital and Emerging Technologies. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Father Bonatti, some in the audience might be surprised to hear that this year the Vatican hosted executives from Google, Meta, OpenAI, Anthropic, and Palantir. Can you explain the Vatican's position when it comes to AI? And what's the message that you're hoping tech companies walk away from meetings like this with?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, actually, Vatican understand, or the Church is understanding such kind of transformation as the last ring chain of a long transformation that started with the Industrial Revolution. So in one direction is simple, another step in automation. But this kind of automation now is not just a matter of jobs and automation in task of jobs, but we touched languages. And with language, we build cultures. And with culture, we build also the social textile that allow us to stay together, that allow us to build community, that allow us to build trust. And so sea changes to simple quote Shakespeare, on this kind of infrastructure and in this kind of societal building bricks can bring us to really unstable condition. And so the social teaching of the church is a 112-year-long contribution that simply say that without justice, without participation of people, such kind of transformation can also reflect in a less stable society and a less peaceful environment.
And Kate, you've worked for some of the biggest tech companies, including NVIDIA and Intel. You've warned that the digital divide is becoming an AI divide. And I'm just interested in how your company now tackles that challenge.
Thank you for having me as well. It's a pleasure to be here. Like you mentioned, we actually started by being a climate tech startup. But now we've actually evolved into building sovereign data infrastructure for countries across the global south. And this happened a little bit by accident, because as we were engaging with our entire ecosystem, we realized that everybody across the global south is now feeling the emergency of adopting AI solutions, but doesn't even know where to start. So governments, private sector companies alike are all trying to scramble to understand, how do I make my data safe and how do I make my data sovereign, retain control over it? What are the types of solutions that I need to adopt? And what does this infrastructure look like? So when it comes to really how we've been operating and trying to close that gap, we realized that we're operating at the convergence of three things. There is a digital divide. 2.6 billion people are still very much unconnected, and a lot of them are in our countries. There is a data divide. When you think about AI solutions today, a lot of the large language models and chatbots, most of it is trained by data that's scrapping from the internet, but a lot of people, a lot of our culture, a lot of our languages, a lot of our data is not online. We have societies that are not fully digitized yet. And then you have a compute divide, where Africa has less than 1% of the world's data center capacity. So if you don't have compute, you don't have GPUs, how are you going to train your own AI systems? So really understanding how we could support countries not just feel like they have to catch up, but understand what does a sovereign data and AI infrastructure looks like in the constraints that you have, and with the opportunities that you have locally. And that's what we have set out to do as a company.
Mr. Gill, you previously helped establish India's National Task Force on AI, and now you're the UN's top tech envoy. Where can AI further global development goals, whether it's in areas like education or agriculture?
Thank you for having me. And this is a great opportunity. So AI can accelerate sustainable development across all the 17 SDGs, from zero poverty, zero hunger, all the way to the green transition, managing plastics in the oceans, the health of our oceans. But I think to be able to do that, we don't need millions of specific solutions. We need millions of solution makers like Kate, and we need to enable the solution makers with the minimum capacity that's needed to innovate with AI, with data. And therefore, our focus at the UN has been on putting a floor under the AI divide, as we call it. This was a term used by the Secretary General's high-level advisory body, on which Paolo, Father Benanti served as well. So I think I see immense promise, climate change, resilient agriculture, managing the new energy grids that would be needed. So we cannot do all of this without AI, but we can't just run after specific solutions. We have to enable the solution making.
There are many places in the world, many countries that I've reported on before I moved back to Washington, D.C., where reliable electricity is still a struggle. Considering this part of the world, Father Benanti, what must be done to ensure that AI contributes to closing rather than widening this global digital divide?
Well, when we talk about electricity, we are talking about global infrastructure or an infrastructure. During the time we move, I was born and grew up in Rome, so water pipe are one of the first infrastructure that my ancient relative built. But that infrastructure allowed us to grow with a city that before Christ was 1 million of people, was able to host 1 million of people. And that kind of infrastructure is also something that is used to build a social contract. You know, when I wake up every morning and I go to wash my teeth or drink some water, I don't think if there is a drinkable water, because I trust to people of my community that they make the control, that everything is good. When I fly with an airlines, I know that the control on their planes are made. So talking about infrastructure is talking about something that allows people to get by, but also something that allows society to be understood as a society. Then it becomes telecommunication and electricity. Now, to have such kind of effect, we rely on computation. And computation that arise on the East Coast of the United States with big company, during the 70s became personal computation on the West Coast. And that kind of, democratizing of computation transformed the reality as we see. And probably the last chain is the smartphone. But now with data center, we see a concentration again of computation. And with a digitized life, the people that will control the centralized computation can control all the life that we digitize. The bottleneck is the electrical power consumption. And we see that we have company here in the United States that simply both a nuclear power plant or the energy produced by a nuclear power plant subtracting from the grid. So is this a data center, a private asset that is pinging on public infrastructure, or has to be understood as a public infrastructure that with other infrastructure allow community to live and get by? Well, now the things move from ethics, that is my, academic field, to politics, and this is a total different reality, but the question has to be made in place. And the way in which we'll answer to this question will describe the society AI-enabled that we are trying to describe. Of course, energy is really different around the world, and this is a topic that we have to address to avoid much more inequality and division around the globe.
And Kate, in Africa, that's a continent that leapfrogged ahead of the world in the mobile revolution. In terms of infrastructure, does it have what it needs to maybe do something similar when it comes to real-world applications of AI?
Yeah, so right now there are a couple of data centers that are being built, and to the question of power connectivity, I actually think it's an opportunity for our countries, again, to show how to do it right. A lot of the energy in Africa is actually coming from renewable. If you think about Kenya's grid, where I live, 90% of the grid is clean energy. So it's coming from hydro, geothermal, solar. So by default, a data center that is built there that is actually powered by the grid will be more sustainable than what you will find in global north country or what's being built in global north countries. So I do see this as an opportunity for our countries to really show what it takes to build ethical infrastructure, but also support countries across the global north to understand how to organize themselves and also use some of those resources for the infrastructure they're building and deploying.
If I could jump in on the energy question, I think the energy transition, the green transition, and the digital transition have to go hand in hand. And there are tremendous opportunities, but we also have to think about not only where the energy is coming from, but what use are these data center capacities, AI factories are being put to. So more collaborative use of AI so that we don't have to replicate the same thing a million times over all around the world. Working together on data sets to solve common challenges, and more use of small language models. Large language models are very energy intensive, and they really don't move the needle on the sustainable development goals. So smaller models that are energy efficient, that can be on the edge on devices in low resource settings. I've seen that on the ground in Vietnam, in Africa, in India. I think that's the way to go.
And I'd like to ask you one more question about the UN. We are here in New York this week. You've been at the forefront of global governance when it comes to emerging technologies, figuring out where there is consensus. This morning, President Trump blasted the United Nations once again as ineffective. Do comments like this make it harder to build consensus among member states?
My experience has been that we've built consensus on these issues twice in the past 1 year, and in a very meaningful way. So last year at the Summit of the Future, 193 member states came together to adopt the Global Digital Compact and decide on 3 of the main recommendations from the advisory body: setting up a governance dialogue, setting up an international independent scientific panel, so we have science-informed policy, and third, moving forward on AI capacity to bridge the AI divide. And recently, those 2 mechanisms, the global dialogue and the scientific panel, their modalities were again decided by consensus. So there is sometimes a lot of noise and there are shifts, that's part of our reality today. But I keep my eye on what's creative, what's positive, and what keeps us moving. I think it's the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, and I was recently in the Muir Woods in North San Francisco, and the delegates were gathered there in that majestic setting where nature kind of commands all your attention. I think if we didn't have the United Nations today, we'll have to reinvent it immediately, because there are some problems, frankly, peace and security, climate change, AI governance, where we need to work together and have a neutral, convening platform at least to come together and do something about these challenges.
Father Bonatti, you said, quote, that global governance is needed, otherwise the risk is social collapse. What do you mean by that? What is global governance in this case, and how close are we to getting there?
Well, be quoted by a Washington Post journalist could be dangerous, but in that case, actually is the result of my experience with United Nations work. And the idea is this, with this digital transformation, we enhance a lot what we can do and what we can't do. But the nature of the new artifact that we are building, software-defined artifact, some way can escape from a normal way to regulate it. So imagine what happened in your mobile phone. You own the hardware, but we simply get a license on the software. And usually in the law, when you own something, you have 3 rights. The right to use, it comes from Latin, the right to abuse, to destroy, but the right to have the fructus, that means to have all the possible gain that come from the use of that tool. But with a software-defined object, we know that fructus is subtracted to us and go to digital company, and also the abuse, the abuse remains, but the use could be limited. So this new reality is something that can escape any possible enforcement style that we have now. Because you can have some object that is selling one market with one nation, but actually is outside of that market and that nation. So without a global governance, without a system that take us together in dialogue on this, it will be, like mouse and cat, or and there are some kind of paradise, or the worst scenario, Blackpool, in which you can see that the strongest simple violator could violate the rule of law.
And Kate, we've often seen technology developing faster than the rate of governance. How is the regulatory landscape evolving in countries like Kenya and other places in Africa?
So right now, a lot of countries in Africa are actually adopting national AI strategies, something that has been widely adopted by the Global North before. And one of the things we're seeing is that the ecosystem is kind of shifting to really understand how to build regulations that is adapted to its own countries and the constraint in which it operates. By that, I mean that a lot of countries are looking into who actually is driving AI innovation on the ground, right? If you think about AI innovation in the US, it's mostly driven out of big tech, the large startups. If you think about Europe, it's regulatory driven with the EU AI Act. China, pretty much by the government. Africa, it's very grassroots, bottom-up, coming from the communities, developers and startups on the ground. So we're now seeing, and that Kenya is a good example of that, we're now seeing governments actually turning to that local ecosystem to ask, okay, what does our AI ecosystem looks like, and what do you need as developers, practitioners, to be able to be successful? And I'm seeing this also happening in a complete other country, the Caribbean, for example, Barbados, where we've been doing a lot of work, also looking to understand how how, as a small country, can I actually anchor a national AI strategy that is really centered on the problems my citizens are facing and put my citizens first? How can I actually bring in the skills that I need to develop solutions that are proper to the challenges that our country is facing today? And that's now it's accelerating, because I think that countries are seeing and feeling the emergency of really understanding, needing to understand what they need to put in place so that they're not left behind in the race.
And Mr. Gill, what do you think about that? What do you think is the prospects for self-regulation when it comes to technologies like AI?
I think that's a layer that we must leverage: self-regulation, ethical behavior at the level of companies and startups and entrepreneurs. But I think that needs to be supplemented by national and regional frameworks, especially on data protection. So I'm thinking of the EU GDPR here. I think there are tremendous challenges ahead on data. It's not only the creative side, how data is being used for training AI, but also protection as we move into more powerful AI agents that act on our behalf. So how is our personal data being used? And then there is a thin layer of global governance of AI with the scientific panel, where you have these informed assessments, so that we kind of find the right sweet spot between hype and horror, as so we swing sometimes. So I think those three layers have to work together. Self-regulation, I'm a little skeptical given our experience. We've seen with social media is supposed to do many great things, but then we've had some slippages. I think I worry a lot about us slipping on this slope, lemming-like walking into some areas, dark areas, whether it is public information, the work that the Washington Post and other newspapers do to keep us informed, keep our democracies healthy, and our dialogues and debates more informed. So I think we have to be careful that we don't leave it only to the goodwill of the private sector.
And Kate, how invested are these major global AI companies in African markets? And if there is a lack of investments, what could the consequences be of that?
I think we heard in the previous fireside chat that 86% of AI investments are going to US companies. So think about Africa being a really afterthought for a lot of this market. But to a certain extent, I think we need to deconstruct and reconstruct how we've been looking at AI innovation. Like, we've been extremely biased by this view that's coming from the US, from Europe, from big tech companies that are really leading the narrative and are making us think that there is no AI innovation being driven out of Africa or out of other emerging economies in the global south, when actually it's just a very different type of innovation. And when you start thinking about, okay, it's not fundamental research, the developers will not invent a new model architecture, they will not invent a new compute platform, but they will actually innovate in the applied AI landscape and how they're applying technology to solve communities and their environmental challenges. That's when we actually start thinking, okay, innovation is already there, and we need to support the local ecosystem. And if we switch our mind and we see it as more, we need to support local developers, local practitioners, rather than we need to make $100 billion into a new data center, then that's when I think global companies will manage to win the market, but also manage to help advance AI innovation locally.
And Father Renati, I'd like to end on a question from our audience. This is from Rita Sphere from Maryland. She asks, how far could AI go in terms of predicting how human intelligence will evolve, and could it become an alternative to some religions?
Well, an easy one. Well, I know that when you play with Washington Post, some kind of question, right? Well, actually, first of all, my background is an engineer. Can AI have a conscience? Absolutely not. But for Turing question, and conscience is not a Turing computable problem, so such kind of machine cannot compute this problem. And that make, let's breathe. But the problem is another one, that we are a really unique species. we was able to change our place in the evolutionary chain because we are able to cooperate. And to cooperate is possible because every one of us develop a theory of mind on someone else. I see you and I imagine that you have an answer, you have will, you have patience like me. This is the way in which the dog domesticate us, you know, these big eyes, we have a theory of mind, he loved me, no, actually he has sausages, but okay, we domesticate the dog. Well, the problem is that such kind of tools are starting to allow us to develop a theory of mind on them. And that start to have some feeling, some kind of confidence and trust. But they are machine made to maximize the interaction things. So the problem is not if they will become a religion or not religion, that we can trust to a statistical system as something that can give us life or death. And that is simple dangerous. So we need to be trained. The real enabling platform is the human beings. As we see, we need to train us.
There's a follow-up from Rita. She asks, how do religious authorities adapt in this era of AI? And what does this mean for our humanity if AI does become super intelligent?
Okay. I have a timer here. I'm looking like, you know, when a football, the time is going, you are winning the game. Okay, let's go straight on that. It's not the first time that it happened. Last time that the language technology was changed, that was the printing press, a lot of things changes and religious changes. Before there is one reader and everyone was hearing, then everyone has his own Bible and start the personal interpretation. And things not always go well, we have some fight. What is the next step? I know that you love my you know, diplomatic way to say things. The challenge here is that with such kind of AI, everyone can have his own text. And so where is the truth? Where is something that I can trust on? You know, I spend my elementary time painting and coloring a mushroom, red mushroom with white dots. That I found a source that convinced me that it's better to not eat it. This is a reliable source. I have not everything that I need in my instinct. I need that someone pass to me such kind of competence. The same thing is on faith and religious belief. So the problem of having such powerful machine is that we are not sure that we are passing to the next generation only trustable sources. And this is a challenge not only for religion, but for human culture.
What a great note to end on. Oh, thank you so much. We'll certainly continue to follow the story. Father Benazzi, Amdeep Singh Gill, Kate Kalat, thank you so much for joining us here today. Stay with us. We have more conversations ahead. Thank you.
At the University of Maryland, brilliant minds unite across disciplines to ignite AI innovation. We apply visionary technology to track wildfires, spot hidden illness, protect our food supply, and make AI's benefits accessible to all, while preparing tomorrow's leaders to explore AI's potential and put people first. We're shaping the future of AI for discovery, for community, for the public good.
Afternoon, everybody. What an amazing turnout. What an amazing day. Is everyone having an amazing time? Kudos to the Washington Post Live team. Wow, this has been just such an amazing afternoon of conversations. I'm Louisa Savage. I'm editorial director for WP Intelligence, and I'm just thrilled to be here with you in New York today, especially since with us today from the University of Maryland is President Daryl Pines. He's not only a university president, but he's an aerospace engineer who was doing AI before AI was a thing, and we've had a really interesting time talking about that. And Professor Hal Dowmeh, he is director of the Artificial Intelligence Interdisciplinary Institute at Maryland, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that is. But we're here really to talk about what colleges and universities are doing and how uniquely they are positioned to shape the future of AI. and how they can balance innovation with responsibility and drive progress to benefit the public good. So welcome, President Pines, Dr. Dome. President Pines, I mean, we know that AI is impacting absolutely every part of our lives. We've been hearing about that all day. Tell us a little bit, from your perspective, how AI has impacted higher education, both the landscape overall and at the University of Maryland campus.
Well, first of all, Louisa, thank you for partnering with the University of Maryland. It's an honor and privilege for us to partner with the Washington Post on this incredible summit. So how many of you use Google today? This is the test. Okay, put your hands out. How many of you use ChatGPT today? Oh, a little bit more. So 4 years ago, you were not using ChatGPT, right? November of 2022 is when OpenAI put out something called ChatGPT that radically changed all of our lives, including our lives in higher education. And it changed our lives in higher education in 5 specific ways. First, how we educate students. That was number 1. Number 2, the research that we do in responsible AI by our faculty and our students. Number 3, AI policy and governance, both at the university and in the local environment of our state and our nation. Number 4, how we do innovation and entrepreneurship, leveraging the AI capability to translate things from the laboratory to monetized products. And then number 5, how do we ensure AI equity? So let me speak to this, the educational part. At the University of Maryland, AI has had an incredibly transformative effect. We are going to launch, for the first time in the history of our university, a revolutionary degree program, a Bachelor's of Arts in AI and Philosophy. We'll be the first in the nation in the fall of 2026. My 2 colleagues from philosophy are right here to the left of me in the audience, and I'm very proud of what they've accomplished. Number 2, towards the equity part, our Smith School of Business and our Dean, Prabadev Kanana, and his team launched a certificate program mostly for career readiness to really help citizens of our community, but also small business owners, to learn about AI for free, a completely open online course sequence. Guess how many people enrolled? Over 30,000 people have enrolled since May, and that's available for anyone in this room. But that's a service that we wanted to do, that the Smith School of Business wanted to do for small business owners, and to level the playing field so that everyone can learn about the tools of AI. And finally, in education, our faculty and our Division of Information Technology have developed all kinds of chatbots, and I just want to talk about one of them. We have a virtual tutor, like a virtual assistant, like your own personal virtual assistant, that is already activated. So I could be taking a class in calculus, and I have this tutor which will monitor my pace, probe and give me questions to make sure that I understand the material, even give me quizzes. It's my own personal virtual assistant that any student can use and any faculty member can leverage. This is the power that we're seeing of AI in education.
That's amazing. Dr. Dame, on the flip side, what is higher education's role in shaping AI and its impact on broader society?
Yeah, I think to answer that, it's worth taking a step back and sort of saying, like, what does AI over the next 5 or 10, 20 years look like? And to me, the key question we face, and I think we've heard echoes of this in both of the previous sessions, is, how do we make AI a force that is, uplifting for people and uplifting for society, and all of society and all of people? And I think that, if we're going to answer that question, we can't do it just from like a technological perspective. We have to think about the humanistic side. We have to think about the social side. We have to think about all the careers that people are going to be going into and the training that they're going to get. And so I think, higher education in particular is, as far as I know, basically the only place where you can find all of the experts in all of these areas in one place. I think, with my University of Maryland hat on, I think we're particularly well suited to do that. But I think that this big challenge of, how do we make sure that the human is sort of the center of the AI development is something that higher education is just incredibly well poised for. At UMD, we've been doing the technology side for a long time. We were talking earlier about one of the groups, the computer vision group that started back in the 60s, right? It's hard to believe that that was like 60 years ago that this stuff was going on. My own field of natural language processing, we've had a group going for about 40 years working on that stuff, and including 2 alums who went out and created some of the original large language model technology that formed the basis for what we do today. So a very bit aside, so for those of you who don't know, Jim Henson, who created the Muppets, is one of the probably most famous UMD alums. And 2 of the original large language models by UMD alums were named Bert and Elmo, sort of in homage to the Jim Henson connection to UMD. So, this is something that we've been involved in a lot, both through the students that we put out and research we do internally that really brings together different disciplines. Like one project that you can see on the screen in the back is about developing tutoring systems for students who are trying to learn to play the violin. And this is a collaboration between the School of Music, between computer science, between education, looking at these questions of how do we build things that support teachers, support their students as they're trying to learn this very challenging skill, and really trying to open access to the arts for really everyone.
Well, I think a lot of people might not know this, but I think it's really remarkable. The University of Maryland has been, once again, just today, ranked as a top 10 public university for AI in the nation by US News and World Report. So congratulations on that. And you got another, that's a pretty big deal, right? And you got another increase in your overall rankings today to, was it 16th in the nation, which is amazing. But talk a little bit, President Pines, on what does it take to be a leader in the field like this that is so fast moving, so pervasive, everyone wants a bite of this. What are you doing to be a leader?
So I always think that when you see these kind of movements that are transformative, they have foundations. You heard from my colleague, Dr. Dame, that a lot of folks didn't know in this room that some of the original large language models came from faculty from the University of Maryland's Computer Science Department. The original image processing work was done in 1964 in a center called CFARS, led by a faculty member by the name of Dr. Ariel Rosenfeld, who then hired a bunch of other folks in image processing that leads to the technology that you're seeing today. So foundationally, that's how we started in AI. But the most important thing I wanted to point out about our capability is that the University of Maryland's Computer Science and Information Science groups, we actually graduate the most computer scientists and information scientists of a residential campus in the United States. So we have been doing it. That's why we've been top 10. They go everywhere in the nation. They go to all the tech firms, and they are our legacy to artificial intelligence and computing. And they really work on some of the world's most challenging problems, and that we are most proud of.
That's amazing. And just kind of helping us look forward a little bit, whether we're in industry or in policy, where do you see the most exciting or impactful research areas right now that are being pursued at the University of Maryland in AI specifically?
Well, sort of piggybacking on what President Pines said, I think that the way that you got to be a top 10 in AI is you invest a lot in fields like computer science and information science, in the 60s. I think the way that you stay there 10 to 20 years from now is you invest in these big interdisciplinary collaborations. And that's interdisciplinary across the campus, but also with partners, right? Whether it's corporate partners or NGOs or government, we're starting up a bunch of degree programs. One of our visions is that every student on campus has the opportunity to understand how AI will affect their future career. And in order to do that, we want to work with, for instance, the Washington Post to understand, what will journalism look like in 5-10 years. And
you tell us.
No, but we have expertise on both sides, right?
Yeah,
and I think that, what we can do is, create things in like the capstone courses we're offering or the Gen Ed courses for, we call it like Path to AI courses for all students across campus, work with companies, work with NGOs, work with nonprofits, find really impactful projects that will both move the needle on the AI side of things, but, to a bunch of points that were brought up in the previous discussion, do it in a way that's like grounded in the local needs of the community, whether that's, Prince George's County for us, or, if you think about other universities across the country, their own local places. So I think, keeping the connections internally and externally is the way that, we move from here to 10 or 20 years out.
President Pines, is there an area of research that's particularly exciting you right now in AI that's happening on campus?
Well, I think what Dr. Dame didn't mention was we do work in ethical AI, trustworthy AI. And we think that's really, really important because one of the challenges that we're all seeing is synthetic versus authentic, sort of in, things related to voiceovers, to images, to videos, to your work in journalism. How do we trust the information that we're getting? How can we validate that information? So we care about it from a technology perspective, but we mostly care about it from a humanist perspective. So we have work that's related to trustworthy AI, as well as work in our School of Journalism, our Merrill School of Journalism, that actually is looking at these issues relative to validating what's true, and so that you, the Washington Post, can put out more truthful information that's been validated, leveraging AI.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, President Pines, Dr. Dame, for sharing your expertise. You can find them after the program and ask them what to do about students using ChatGPT to write their papers, because we didn't quite get to that. But they have it all thought out, actually. You have a really good response on that one. But stay right here, everyone. I'm going to hand it back to my colleagues in the newsroom. Thank you so much, both of you.
Lisa.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This AI revolution, which creates these enormously new, better cognitive artifacts. And how can we deploy that in various ways to get drug discovery superpowered?
AI helped us define the shape of the lock, but now AI is helping us define the shape of the key. And once we find out how to make the key, there will be a whole universe of materials. I'm not even just talking about drugs, a whole universe of materials that can interface with biology.
So, ladies and gentlemen, locks and keys, and the two gentlemen who were just behind me on video. I'm David Ignatius, a foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Post, interloping as a would-be AI discussant. I'm joined by Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, which I'm sure everyone here knows and uses, Sun Valley investor, and the world-renowned cancer scientist, Siddhartha Mukherjee. They're the co-founders, in addition to everything else they've done, of a new company called Manas AI, which is in the business of drug discovery, and you're going to learn a lot more now about how they're doing it. Reid, let me begin with you. You were an early investor in OpenAI. They're at the liftoff of this amazing revolution.
Yep.
And you're also a board member at Microsoft. Your Manas AI website speaks about your mission of disrupting drug discovery. And I want to ask you, as someone who's a veteran of disruption, what about the drug industry is ripe for the disruption, and how does Manas plan to go about it?
So, look, ultimately, all industries go through periods of disruption. One of the key things that we are seeing with AI is the ability to apply massive scale compute with data, and obviously everyone's familiar with large language models and what's been happening there. But there's actually a whole bunch of different kinds of AI work that is in that prediction about what options are in very complicated spaces. So probably most people in the room are familiar with kind of AlphaGo, which has more moves in it than there are atoms in the universe, and yet you created an AI, AlphaGo, that could beat the world players, and now AlphaZero and its descendants are essentially unbeatable. And that's all through different forms of learning mechanisms that give you prediction. Now in large language models, those are predictions of next token, like what would likely be the next token. And token is you can say word. It's not it's not quite a word. It's actually more kind of a subword is a structure within LLMs. But that also, of course, applies to biology, and that applies to anything from identifying targets that could be the result for targeting a therapeutic. It could be the therapeutic molecule itself. And so part of how this came about is I was sitting talking to my partners at Greylock. I said, look, there's going to be a ton of very interesting kind of work in the Valley on enterprise software, on productivity software, on security, on coding agents. I'll help with all of that. But I really think there's some blind spots. And part of the blind spots are things, for example, like drug discovery. And they said, okay, that's cool. Well, let us know what you do. And so I started calling my friends. My very first call was to Sid. Sid and I went out to a Japanese place here in New York. And his selection, Sid has excellent restaurant selections. And
that's where'd you go? It was in the village. I forget the name, but it only serves a particular brand from a particular place of Wagyu beef.
Yes.
Is all I remember.
Yes.
Anyway.
And so I was running through all of this stuff and said, in addition to being a world celebrated, it's not his words, my words, celebrated cancer researcher, these are his words, the next words are his, I've also brought cancer drugs to market. And I was like, no, I was familiar with the Emperor and I was familiar with your drug research. I was not familiar with that. And he's like, and so Sid gave me an education on how the current pharmaceutical drug discovery process works. And I went, okay. And we took it down to micro slices and said, okay, here's an area where current AI can do something that's off the shelf. Here's where you could build something. And then we looked at it and said, okay, how do you change that entire process, right? And we said we should do a company. We should make this happen.
So, Siddhartha, I want to turn to you for your piece of this. I'm sure most of us have read your book, Emperor of All Maladies, which is just an extraordinary book, won the Pulitzer Prize in 2011, I think.
And coming out again in December with 5 new chapters.
Good. So I want to ask you, from your perspective as somebody who's
kill someone with it.
Thinking deeply about cancer and disease, as you look at this drug discovery challenge that you and Reed have taken on, what do you see in terms of the specific things we worry about as people who are going to get sick? What are the things that you're going to begin to address in terms that this audience, the people watching on TV, would understand?
Well, unfortunately, at some point of time, all of us, and I'm not trying to be a downer, but all of us or all of our loved ones will get sick with something. In the United States, most likely a chronic disease, cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative disease, autoimmune diseases, and so forth. So what we want to do is to, as Reed said, dissect the process by which the current pharmaceutical channels work in order to make medicines, and make as much of that AI native as possible. Now, obviously, every chain of that can't be made AI native yet, but there are many, many chains that can be made AI native. And I'll just walk you very quickly through them, because that'll give you a sense of the roadmap of where the problems lie and how they can be solved. So almost always, current drug discovery, I'm going to leave aside serendipity, because that's a completely different universe. It will always continue to happen, and To some extent, you can make serendipity AI native, but I'm just going to leave that aside for a second. Well, drug discovery begins with target identification, which means that you figure out what's wrong, what is the cause. Sometimes you can, and not always, but you can sometimes boil it down to 1 to 2 to 3 molecules. Sometimes it's just one molecule. Often it's 2 to 3 molecules, and you have to intervene on them. So target identification depends on the corpus of knowledge, and that is very amenable to becoming AI native, because AI is very good at taking vast corpuses or corpi of knowledge and making them AI native. And we can talk a little bit about how it does that. The next thing that happens, by the way, and this is an extraordinarily tedious process, often people ignore false positives and false negatives in that process. AI doesn't ignore that. That's one reason to do it, so you get better drugs at the end. The second thing that happens, and I'll run as quickly as I can through all of this. The second thing that happens is right now, the most common way, although not the only way, is to either do rational drug design, which means that a computational or synthetic chemist sits down with your target, your protein of interest, and tries to make a medicine that will either block it or activate it, depending on which direction you want to go at. That's rational drug design. The other way is to throw hundreds of millions of candidate compounds onto your protein, have some mechanism to check whether it's being blocked or activated, and then figure out sort of what's called a hit. Both those processes can be made AI native. And so if you make those AI native, you are taking away the chance that you'll get a hit by chance, and taking away hundreds of thousands of hours, human hours, to get that hit. If you make the design process AI native, again, you're not only taking away hundreds of thousands of human hours, but you're also taking an incredible expert, someone who has spent their lifetime learning how to design a drug and converting them into a reproducible and scalable unit.
Let me add in one thing here, because I think I was on this learning journey from Sid, and one of the key things is not just what do you do with the molecule that's killing you,
yes,
and bind to it, but you have to create something that doesn't bind to other things,
yes,
that will then kill you. The toxicity is part of where the computation gets actually very
extraordinarily interesting. Yes. Yeah, and yeah, go ahead. And then just to finish up the last piece of this, there's a refinement process that's called hit to lead. That's when you take a kind of proto molecule and then redesign it to go into becoming a real drug. That process can become AI native because there are genetic algorithms that will very rapidly move you to a lead. And the final piece is a clinical trial. That can become AI native too, because many aspects of that trial, including many things we can talk about, shall and can become AI native. So basically, when we went through this dissection process, we quickly realized that each piece of this could become AI native.
So your literature about the company focuses on something you call Project Cosmos. And I want to ask each of you to explain what that is, because talking before we came out here, it's obviously central to what you're going to be able to do. Let me ask you to go first and describe it, really in AI terms, and then Siddhartha, if you speak more about the drug design part.
So, one of the things that casual watchers of the AI, and this gets back to the reason I was setting this up with the discussion with my partners, Greylock, is they say, oh, you're just building one big compute model, and the big compute model, you put in tokens and it outputs tokens. And ultimately, by the way, when you're saying, hey, these are targets and these are potential, potential targets, these are potential binding molecules, those are also tokenized. But unlike LLMs, which are mostly these kind of very particular kind of transformers, and this will actually, I think, happen not just with drug discovery, but as with many forms of AI, you're going to actually have multiple types of computational artifacts. So part of what we looked at said, look, there's some places where these transformers would be useful, but there's also other places where, for example, you want to take a different approach because you want to have the AI, call it agent, if you will, but artifact, obey the laws of chemistry, obey the laws of physics, obey the laws of biology within the set of how you're building out both an understanding of the targets and also prospective molecules that can be cures. And what you want to do is you want to put those together. And part of the reason why you're constructing a new technology, it isn't just like take ChatGPT and say, oh, can you help me figure out a target molecule for triple-negative breast cancer? It doesn't work, right? That's not the way it works. No, you actually build specific, different kinds of AI that work together in order to take this enormously complicated space of biology. Like another thing that some AI people will say is, oh, we'll just simulate all biology. Let's not wait for that. That will take quite some time. And by the way, can you get there fully is an interesting, kind of future question. But so it's building those, and that's what Cosmos is.
So, Siddhartha, we were talking earlier about this, and you came up with a, to me, powerful analogy to boxes and things that would fit into boxes as a way of explaining this. Maybe you'd share that with the audience as well.
Yes, I'm happy to share that with the audience. It'll take a little bit of patience, but stay with me. So first of all, what is Project Cosmos? Cosmos, fundamentally, and we often make this distinction, Cosmos is an attempt to build a true foundation model, a neurosymbolic foundation model to make new molecules, to do generative chemistry. And generative chemistry is different because it's not searching through chemical space. It's not a search function. So you don't take a massive library, imagine you're solving a puzzle, and there's a missing puzzle piece. What it's not is a search function. So one way you could solve the puzzle is you could take all the pieces, which may be 10 billion pieces, and say what fits. And if it doesn't fit, throw it away. Fit, throw it away, fit, throw it away. That is not what Project Cosmos is. What Project Cosmos is a generative model, which means that you look at the piece of the puzzle and you say, can I design a molecule that will fit into that piece of the puzzle and thereby make a new drug, but it's completely new matter. It does not exist in the library. It may have fragments that exist in the library, but it's putting together those fragments until you find the puzzle fit. So that's the simple explanation of the difference between generative, foundational, neurosymbolic AI versus a search and find function, which is a different kind of way of finding drugs. We're actually doing both, but our hopes are we can do the second. Now, I'll just very quickly summarize this box piece. The way to think about this box piece is, now you could ask the question, okay, well, that's great. You said some fancy things. How do you actually make a molecule that will fit inside a particular place? And the way you do this, and no one has ever attempted to do this, is to figure out what the parameters are of that space. So to take that space, which is inside a protein, a hole, literally a hole, a physical hole, but that physical hole has chemical properties. There are some places that are sticky. There are some places that are curved. There are some places that are, as you can imagine from this room, there's a pillar in the middle of it. So imagine now for a second that that entire thing is parametrized. And it becomes abstracted into parameters. And now imagine that your molecule is also parametrized. It just now has a series of properties. So what Project Cosmos is essentially to match, based on learning, match parameters of the molecule to the parameters of the space. And when there's a match, it scores highly, and then you keep building that way. Now, this is a simplistic analogy, and obviously there's much more to this.
This is super powerful stuff. I need to ask the ordinary person's basic question, Reed. How far off is this? How far off is the realization of the dream that you and Siddhartha are describing?
Well, this is one of the things, another thing I've learned from Sid, because part of in a regulatory agency we're not allowed to be very explicit. What I would say is the same kind of amplification that you see in consumer or work use of AI, those are the same tools that we're using to be able to do call it fitting the puzzle pieces into the box. And so we're very hopeful about, our ability to become a drug factory through software.
If you're being that careful, this must be for real. That's all I can take away. So let me just stay on this, since you mentioned regulatory concerns. I wonder if, as you look at what's happening to the world of public health, as you look at what's happening to the CDC, the NIH, whether you have concerns about the larger framework into which this extraordinary set of discoveries is going to be placed, and the constraints that might be imposed, the privacy issues that might arise. Just to talk a little bit. We're living in a world in which our sense of science and health is being turned on its head, frankly. What do you both think about that?
Well, look, public health is a really different concern. We are concerned about public health. For instance, it would be wonderful to have a new drug against multi-drug resistant TB. And sure enough, it's an amenable problem. The CDC is also a different concern. What we're really concerned about right now is the FDA. And to be fair, the FDA, aside from radical cuts in its staff, which is a big problem, but to be fair, the FDA has sort of kept on its road. It has slowed down, but it's kept on its road. The real harm has been done to, for instance, USAID, to PEPFAR, to the CDC, all of which we know about. The FDA, because there is ultimately, I suppose, because there's bipartisan support, because everyone gets sick, whether you fall on whichever side of the political spectrum you fall on, everyone gets sick. The FDA has been, I shouldn't say left alone because there have been radical cuts in it, but its path has not been deviated fundamentally. And I'm hopeful, very cautiously hopeful, that the FDA's path will not be deviated, and in fact, some of the cuts will be taken back so that the staffing can come back.
So, Reid, trying to make this non-political. You've prospered in this amazing American ecosystem of innovation, and a part of that ecosystem historically has been government investment in science and research, in university research, and the incredible laboratories that where scientists work and then often start their own companies. What are your concerns about whether we're damaging that fundamental research engine in the United States because of significant changes in government funding?
Well, I mean, we're making massive impacts, and unfortunately, these are long-term and systemic. I mean, I think there's a lot of, part of what we had is, and have, but it's been very damaged, has been the best scientific, universities in the world, and they are a treasure. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that can be improved, but when you essentially throw all these labs are just like organizations. They have to have budgets, they have students, they have other things, and when you throw that all into deep uncertainty, you essentially massively slow down their ability to function, right? Even as some smart people continue to work there. And obviously the impact on this will be felt in many future generations just from what's happened, in this, first, 8 months so far. And so I think it's a serious self-harm to us and also to the progress of science.
So thank you for that. So, Siddhartha, we have 2 minutes left, my little clock says. The average person's question, I want to posit, when they think about this new world of health and drug discovery is, what about me? How old am I going to live? I mean, it happens that, as I mentioned to you, my father is 105 years old, which is pretty great. So what I asked Siddhartha was, 20 or 50 years from now will we speak of somebody who's 105 as middle-aged?
Well, so I think it's very important to distinguish between 105 as middle-aged versus 105 as a healthy middle age, or as a what one might call a dignified middle age. Right now, people who are living to 105 are living, I would say, lives that are on the edge. It's like every day is a new day. And that's the reality of what happens. They are dying of diseases like osteoporosis, failure of blood. Actually, interestingly, most of them don't die of cancer and heart disease. Most of those people have been culled away from the population because of medical reasons. So they die actually usually of diseases like sepsis and stem cell failure. They're disease of regenerative failure. We will hopefully, once we've, again, hopefully attacked the frontline diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, cardiovascular diseases, and cancer, and some other chronic diseases, we will move our attention, we already have started moving our attention to these diseases of regenerative failure, osteoporosis, sepsis, immune dysfunction, et cetera, which is what the people who are at 105, et cetera, are dying of. And when we do that, then they will hopefully be living healthy, dignified, what you call middle age.
So this is some of the most intellectually interesting and exciting research that I know about. I just want to thank, on behalf of everybody, Reed and Siddhartha for joining us and telling us about their company. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
So I will be back in 1 minute with James Menica to talk about one more aspect of AI.
Hi, everyone. I'm James. In addition to research, I lead a new area at Google called Technology and Society. These capabilities are not just something for the IT department to think about, but these are central to the business strategy of the company. Don't worry about, do people have the right skills to work alongside machines? Are we helping people train and build new skills to adapt to this new workforce? The question of how do we make sure everybody benefits from these technologies is one that I think you should be asking, and we should all be asking ourselves.
So, hello again. I'm still David Ignatius, Foreign Affairs columnist. Very pleased to be joined by James Menica, who is the Senior Vice President of Research, Labs, Technology, and Society, quite a basket at Google. And for 25 years before that was a leading consultant at McKinsey. So he knows the world of business and AI both. Let's start by talking about Google and AI. It's often written that several years ago, Google was on the more cautious side in terms of companies that were experimenting with AI. It had this immense legacy business in research. It's now seen as a company that's very aggressive. And I want to just ask you to speak about Google's embrace of AI and its strategy in this part of its business going forward.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, David. It's actually been an extraordinary journey. I remember my first interaction with Google was actually in 2001, when the founders actually wanted me to join and come work on AI, because I'd done my PhD in AI robotics. So Google has been thinking about AI for a very long time. In fact, if you look at most of the technical breakthroughs in AI, whether it's the transformer architecture, which is the foundation for large language models, diffusion algorithms, and a lot of these basic core scientific innovations, they mostly have come out of Google. And I think the transformer, which was invented in 2017, was a core part of much of what we're seeing today. And I think it is the case that there was the approach at Google was to think deeply about when is it appropriate and when is the technology ready to deploy. So I think what you're seeing now is something we talk a lot about is kind of we're trying to be two things at the same time. We're trying to be bold on one hand, but also responsible on the other hand. And I think for us, these are not conflicting goals. We think both matter. And I should probably say when we say bold, I don't think we don't mean be reckless. We don't mean rush and break things. We just mean be as ambitious as possible about what this technology can do and where it can make extraordinary impacts and differences, which for us, I'm sure we'll talk about this, we think about the impact for people, we think about the impact for the economy, we think about advancing science, we think about tackling massive societal challenges, and we think we're doing all of that. So that's what we mean by being bold. And of course, it's important to be responsible because this is a new technology. There's lots of complexities and challenges that we're going to need to work through. So I think both things are true.
Let me ask you a question that through our conversations this afternoon I keep thinking about, which is how fast this is going to happen. The headlines speak about overwhelming investment and transformational technology, and yet there's some studies that suggest that companies are slowing their rate of adoption of AI, that there may have been a little bit of hype as to how soon AI tools would actually be useful for companies. What's your sense? You've got a unique viewpoint. What's your sense of how fast this is moving?
Well, I think you have to be clear about what this is. I think the technological developments are moving at a breakneck speed. So the advances, we release models every few weeks now. So if you're just looking at the technical advances and innovations, it's breathtaking speed. But at the same time, we know that the adoption and productive use of these technologies in the economy takes a little bit longer. It's a bit like the old Solow paradox, where you remember Bob Solow said, you see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics. And it was only when you had wide-scale diffusion and the transformation of business processes and activities that you started to see that show up in the productivity statistics. I think that's going to go not as fast as I think the technology will go. So I think that's a little bit of what you're seeing now. So yeah, sure, I'm sure most people in companies have tried and played with these tools. But if you look at where are we actually seeing scale deployments, and we're seeing that being applied to productivity enhancing activities and tasks at companies, I think that's a little uneven right now, and I think it's going to take time.
So as I mentioned at the outset, society and impact on society is part of your portfolio. You have spoken about how AI will create jobs and cut jobs, both. I want to ask you to speak about the job disruption phenomenon that AI will mean. Earlier today, we had the managing director of the IMF speak of an AI tsunami that's going to sweep across the global economy. I want to ask what your perspective is.
Yeah, I think thinking through the AI and kind of work and labor markets implications is actually one of the most important things. Look, research that I've done in the past, but also echoed and other economists have done this work. If you look at most of the economic research on this, it basically says three things will happen. And what tends to be the debate is the magnitude of those three things. So those three things are, first, we will likely see some job declines. For example, in occupations where a lot of the constitutive tasks that make up that occupation are easily done by machines. So there will be some job declines. Estimates for that range from 5%, sometimes higher than that, but that's one phenomenon we will see. The second phenomenon we'll see is actually job growth. And I think the job growth will come from a combination of existing jobs seeing more demand, but also new jobs. I think we forget that, if you go back to 1945 and compare to now, 85% of the jobs that have been created in the US economy since 1945 did not exist before. in terms of the kinds of jobs that they are. In fact, if you go recently to 1980, that number is more like 60% of the job growth. This is work by Daron Acemoglu and others, Nobel economists. So this idea of job growth will be part of the picture. But the biggest phenomenon is the third thing, which is the jobs that will change. This is when this technology is kind of assistive to existing and augments existing jobs. By most counts, certainly in the research that I've been involved in, something that's probably going to be 2/3 of what we will see in the next couple of decades. If you don't like my numbers, recently the International Labour Organization put out a study where they looked at something like, I think it was something like 140 countries. And what they concluded is that the assistive augmentative effect was going to be 6 times the displacement effect. So, but even with all these 3 things happening, there's a lot we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to deal with some of the labor market transitions, some of the skilling challenges, to make sure that even as people transition occupations or their jobs change, they have the skills to be able to cope and manage through those transitions. And that's a lot of work that all of us are going to have to focus on.
Your colleague in the business, Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, has spoken about an AI bloodbath in the white-collar job market, even in the world of computer science and coding. I'm sure you've read his comments. Do you think that's overstated, and how would you describe the specific impact in these areas?
I think it's overstated. I think that, as I mentioned at the start, I think it's one thing to think about the pace of the technology. It's quite another to think about the pace at which it gets deployed and adopted in the economy at a pace that starts to actually change jobs. So my expectation is that that change will actually happen, but much, much more slowly. And we'll see that change happen in the 3 ways I just described. So, of course, it is the case that if some occupations, maybe even some sectors, will see more significant job declines, and others will see more significant job growth. But the aggregate picture will look like the biggest phenomena will be these assistive, augmentative uses of this technology.
So Google's in the business of hiring talent, the smartest people in the world, I'm sure. President Trump just announced a change in the way that so-called H-1B visas for highly talented people will be awarded. And the price of those visas is said to go up prospectively for new applicants to $100,000 per visa. I'm just curious whether Google has made inquiries about how this is going to work. And as you look at your business, what impact do you think it will have?
Well, our understanding is that this is going to apply to prospective applicants. So not existing employees who already have visas, but rather the ones in the future. And I think, so that's our understanding. Obviously, we're trying to make sure we stay connected with our employees, that they fully understand that. I also think that it's actually quite important, by the way, to continue to invest in American U.S. talent, even as we do that. But it's no secret for us that we think the U.S. and companies like ours having access to the best talent from wherever they are is a competitive issue that we care deeply about. So we think both things can be true, that we can invest in talent here, of which we should, and we do a lot of that. In fact, most of our employees come that way to us. But also having access to the best talent in the world, I think is important competitively.
But do you think this will have a disruptive impact on Google? And can you imagine a point at which you'd really have to move some of your operations offshore because of the difficulty of getting the people you want to hire into the U.S.?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think even today, the people on H-1B visas for us is a small proportion of our talent pool. So, of course, if you're one of those people who's trying to apply for a job at Google and you're counting on an H-1B visa, of course, you're probably quite concerned. But for us as a company, I think we'll work our way through this. But I think the access to talent is super important for us, whether it's here or wherever the talent is going to come from.
So I want to ask you to think about the kind of macro impact of AI on the global economy. A McKinsey Global Institute study, maybe you had something to do with it.
Well, I used to direct
long
McKinsey
ago.
Global Institute years ago.
So, but this was a 2023 study. Projected that the impact of AI could be an addition of $4 trillion annually to the global economy. It's an enormous estimate. And there's obviously the question with this massive change in the global economy, whether the benefits of that will be shared or they'll be unequal. There'll be a divide in this new AI world. What's your own judgment, first about the extent of the economic change and growth opportunities, and second, the danger of unequal distribution?
Yeah, I think both questions are important. I mean, I think I've seen that study, and I've actually seen many others. In fact, there's some with even bigger numbers than that in terms of contributions to the global economy. But through everything that I see and we're working on with the technology, I would say, yes, the potential is enormous. Because keep in mind that one of the unique things about this technology, we haven't had very many like this, is it's a general purpose technology, and there's a very specific economic definition of what that means, just give it its broad applicability, and also the idea of its knock-on potential to induce knock-on other investments and the ability to continually improve. So it's one of those rare general purpose technology. It's also got another feature which is perhaps unique to AI even more than the other previous technologies, which is economists often call these IMIs. It's an invention for inventing. I think when you look at those two possibilities and you start to see how that could play out across the economy, businesses, large and small sectors, whole economies driving productivity, you kind of see your way through those large numbers. At the same time, I think it's important to note, and we certainly believe that we don't think any of those gains are automatic. They're not going to happen on autopilot. And I think it's going to take a few specific things happening. I think it's going to take adoption. We talked about adoption. It's going to take the transformation of processes and organizations to take advantage of that. It's going to take applying that technology to productivity enhancing use cases. And it's going to take these other complementary investments in the economy. So none of this is automatic, even though the numbers look big and large. But to come to your other question, which is about what this might mean for equity and whether everybody will benefit from this, I think this is one of the things we're all going to need to focus on, because there's nothing that's by itself that implies that just because we capture or realize any of this economic bounty, it'll be broadly available to everybody. And that's what we're going to need to make to put some effort into. And I think this is both true thinking about different countries, but also within countries. If there's one thing that COVID, I think, showed us was how even in the US, there was uneven access to infrastructure, access to technology, even within an advanced economy like the US. So we have to work our way through that. Then you've got the same issue between countries. One of the things we've been thinking a lot about, and I was here last year at the UN General Assembly. You may know this, David. I was co-chairing the UN's high-level body on AI, looking at this globally. And the worry, of course, was what you just said, which is we don't want the current digital divide to turn into the AI divide. So when you look at countries, say, in the global south, what needs to happen? A lot of infrastructure investments, access to the components that are necessary for this technology, whether it's compute or access to models, a lot of infrastructure investments like connectivity, skills, training, and even education. So we're trying to do our part as Google. In fact, just last week, one of the announcements I made was the investments we're making in Africa. So we made a $1 billion investment commitment to build infrastructure in Africa. We already exceeded that, because we made that commitment back in 2019, building connectivity cables all the way down the entire western seaboard of Africa, connecting Central Africa and Southern Africa. So we're doing a lot of those investments. I also announced that we've made our leading model, Gemini, the app, freely available to students in 8 African countries that make up a population of 500 million, so that students who are in school get access to this technology. So I think it's going to take those kinds of investments to make sure people can access the technology and fully participate.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you as the next question about the UN Advisory Board that you served on. So one of the things that we know about new technologies is that they often lead to overinvestment and bubbles. Railroads in Britain in the 19th century are a classic example. Electric lighting, when it first was introduced, led to wild speculative investment that crashed. The investment intensity now surrounding AI is overwhelming. As you look at the industry, just speak about the danger of a bubble developing, whether there's just too much money chasing a limited set of opportunities now in a way that's going to lead to something quite disruptive.
Well, I think what you're seeing with a lot of the investments, including from us, a lot of that is in infrastructure, compute clusters, and all of that. And I think, in our case, we see the demand for all of that. And I think the question is, you would expect it at some point that's going to turn into realized value for the people making the investments, for us. I think in our case, those investments are enabling us to do a whole range of things. So sure, we've got Gemini models and the Gemini chatbot, if you like, but it's also helping us make search even better. We like to think that search is still Google's moonshot in many respects. And I say that because the way people search keeps evolving. There was a time when we all had to type the search query very precisely. Now people search with pictures. You just point your camera at something. So the way people are going to search, so we're seeing that turning, continue to transform our core business. But think about all the things we're doing in our cloud business. And if you live in San Francisco like I do, half the paid rides in San Francisco are Waymos, which are our cars, our autonomous cars. So for us, we see this paying off in multiple different kinds of investments and businesses where we're investing. I think that's a question people should ask themselves, which is, in what way will those investments turn into realized value? We see that as a way to deliver for our customers, for our users, and quite frankly, do some extraordinary things like Waymo and advanced science.
So you don't really see an AI bubble building that would be dangerous?
Yeah, I think we'll see how it plays out for each player in that space, right? I'm describing the kinds of places where we see us being able to deliver on products and services that people like and seem to use a lot. If I look at, for example, at Google, we now have lots of products used by more than billions of people. And I think those products are doing well and they're growing and we're delivering on them. I think it's important to be able to see avenues to transform that into products that delight and excite users, and hopefully will have a reasonable return for us. So we're excited about all of that.
One thing about AI is that there is an inescapable global competition going on. Fundamentally, it's seen as between the United States and China. Google has DeepMind, China has DeepSeek, and DeepSeek turns out to be pretty good given all the limitations that people thought had been placed on China. I want to ask you to assess, from your perspective at Google, but just as a technologist, where China and the US are in this AI race. It's often said by knowledgeable people that the United States is still 6 months, sort of mythical 6 months ahead, but that China is demonstrating, as with DeepSeek, capabilities that are in some ways are surprising. What's your own assessment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the DeepSeek showed us is that perhaps China wasn't as far behind as perhaps people might have thought. But I have an extraordinary, enormous confidence. Keep in mind that this technology, DeepSeek is still a text-only model, and so these models have become natively multimodal. They're doing lots of things. They're now powering robotics. So the breadth of what we're doing with this technology gives me incredible confidence. Keep in mind, for us, we're lucky to have extraordinary teams in Google Research, Google DeepMind, investing in a wide range of aspects of this technology. For example, one of the big highlights last year was breakthrough progress in our quantum AI team. Right. So if you look at the breadth of what we're doing, it gives us confidence. But at the same time, I don't think the US or any of our companies should rest on our laurels. I think this is going to be an intense competition. We're going to need to keep investing. And I think it's great to, to see at least the pendulum perhaps swing back a little bit to encouraging more investment and more innovation to move ahead. So I think all of that, hopefully bodes well. I hope we stay and continue to invest because, at some level, others are investing too. China's clearly investing in what they're trying to do. But I think we have to keep investing in what we're doing.
For a last question, I want to turn to ones that we gathered from young people before this program. And this is from a woman named Jennifer Hicks in Massachusetts. And she asks, recent college graduates have only had a few years of AI exposure and they're struggling to find jobs. How can AI help them adapt their skills to jobs that are in demand?
I think that's an important question from Jennifer. I'd say a few different things. I think one of the things that a few studies have actually now shown is how these technologies can often help and assist early employees, less skilled workers, to actually be able to do things that they couldn't otherwise do and learn from them. I think I'd encourage Jennifer and others to look to using these technologies. I'd also look to use these tools to actually think about their jobs. One of the tools we've developed is something called Career Dreamer, which allows mostly younger people to think about what skills are in demand, how can they match the experiences that they have to the things that they're doing. And we're also running these AI Essentials training courses for students. But I think it's important there's been a little bit of conflation of things about what's happening to people entering the labor markets. I think if you see some of the studies that have shown a slowdown in hiring, there's something that doesn't quite make sense to me, at least, about the timing of all of that. If you look at some of those studies, the downturn happened sometime in the spring of 2022, and you say, okay, so if it was in the spring of 2022 when the hiring slowed down, well, that seems to be too much dead on time because the so-called ChatGPT moment happened in October. So that suggests to me that maybe other things were already going on in the labor markets. Because keep in mind that in many companies there'd been a lot of overhiring that had happened. Certainly the case in the tech industry, in COVID, and a lot of our companies, including ours, had to work our way through a lot of what I call the COVID era hiring. And a lot of that actually started to happen in 2021 and 2022. So I don't think I would equate what we're seeing in the labor markets as being entirely about AI. But it's important for us to invest in young people, give them access to these tools to help them in their careers.
That's super helpful. Jennifer, if you're watching, getting job advice from Google is pretty good. So stay right here. We have a final coming discussion in more detail about the US-China competition. Right now, just join me in thanking James. What a treat to have you here talking about Google.
Thank you.
Okay.
By the year 2030, their goal is to be a world leader in AI, if not the world leader in AI.
China and other countries are racing to catch up to America, having to do with AI, and we're not going to let them do it.
He is insistent that, this is a wake-up call for the U.S. tech industry. He's used this news to advance his position on artificial intelligence, which is that we should have a rollback of the Biden-era policies on this technology.
Hello again. For those just joining, I'm Susanna George, an international correspondent at The Washington Post, and I'm thrilled to be joined on stage this time by two of my Washington Post colleagues, White House reporter Kat Zakrzewski and tech policy reporter Eva Du. Thank you both so much for joining us here in New York. Eva, it's been a long goal of the Trump administration to make sure American AI companies stay ahead of the Chinese. Put this into context for us. Where does the US currently hold an advantage in AI, and where is China catching up the fastest?
Yes, so the US and China have both had intense focus on the AI industry for sort of longer than apparent. You know, AI has been with us for decades, but if we kind of go back to this recent push, sort of 2016, when Google DeepMind came up with AlphaGo, a computer that could beat human Go masters at one of the most complex games that humanity had invented. That was sort of a wake-up moment. And it was the next year, 2017, that China came up with this national AI plan for how they were going to become a leader in the AI industry. And at that point, it seemed very pie in the sky. But actually, sort of 2025, this year, it was on their roadmap as a key year where they wanted to have sort of major achievements in AI. And then they put 2030 as the year that they wanted to become, you know, the world leader in AI. And so that has sort of set up this intense race between the US and China, where right now the US export controls for chips to China have been, there's argument to what degree it's successful, but it very much has slowed China's AI advances. And so in chips, the the US has sort of like a very significant advantage now. But in algorithms, China is catching up pretty quickly, like we've seen with DeepSeek this year. And when it comes to data that's used to train AI, China is in some ways an equal player or even more advanced.
And Pat, we've seen the Trump administration sign several executive orders around AI. Can you tell us a little bit about those actions and where this administration is particularly focused when it comes to AI?
So I would say Trump talks a lot about his America First policy when he's talking about technology, but really what we've seen is an industry first policy over the last few months. We've seen the administration take a number of actions to roll back regulations that were implemented during the Biden administration. You also see a number of moves to make it easier to build data centers domestically. And more recently, we've seen this big push within the administration to export American technology globally to ensure that in other countries they're using American technology versus that of our competitors. And so taken together, you really see moves that have boosted the AI sector domestically. And in DC, people use this term a lot that personnel is policy. And I think one of the ways you see that in this administration is who are the people writing the AI rules? And that is David Sachs, a venture capitalist, and others from the tech industry.
Eva, Chinese firms like DeepSeek and Alibaba, you were mentioning some of them earlier, offer competitive AI models at significantly lower prices, like you were saying. How has that shaped how the Trump administration is thinking about tech policy?
Yeah, we've seen sort of a big swing in policy from the Biden administration to this Trump administration. Whereas the Biden administration was seeking to throttle US AI technologies from reaching China and sort of seeing their domestic AI progress as the biggest threat. Under the Trump administration, the new thinking is sort of China exporting its AI, whether leading edge or sort of good enough AI technology to the rest of the world is sort of the bigger threat. And you mentioned the cost factor that very much plays into it. There is this concern in China in many industries. They've wiped out competitors globally because they had good enough technology that was far cheaper, that price-wise competitors just couldn't compete with. And so there's this concern that this might happen in the AI industry. And you see this shift to prioritizing exporting the US AI stack around the world.
Kat, we've seen America's CEOs head to the White House offering lavish gifts and compliments to President Trump. I think images we're all quite familiar with. Can you explain the dynamic between this administration and the tech industry today?
Of course, it's a total reversal from what we saw with the tech industry and Biden, and even Trump in his first administration. I think some of the most defining images of this presidency have been the CEOs all standing behind him when he was sworn in as president, the pictures of Tim Cook handing him a golden statue in the Oval Office, or the fact even just a few weeks ago when he opened his Rose Garden Club, the tech CEOs were the first to dine there. And this is a real shift from what we saw in the first administration, where often you would see the tech CEOs stand up and even criticize Trump on topics like immigration. And we even saw at times CEOs out in the streets protesting those policies. And now some of those same executives are sitting side by side with him. And when I look at what's happening with the CEOs, it's indicative of a theme that I think we see in terms of how many people, global leaders, are trying to work with Trump. There's so much fear of retribution, and they're being really careful to have this kind of flattery campaign to curry influence in this administration.
Eva, you were touching on this earlier about China's more state-directed approach. How does that compare with the US strategy of public-private partnerships?
Yeah, I think traditionally the US approach has been more to support fundamental research, sort of such as with NSF grants, and to have, like, even with the Chips for America program, until recently, it was sort of a grants-based program where the companies had a significant, were the ones who should be making the decisions with the market. And that's quite different than how China's approach, which has been very much based on these top-down 5-year plans. And we are seeing some changes in the US approach, such as the US government taking a direct stake in Intel, which is sort of unprecedented. So there is some convergence, but still much more state-directed in China.
And I think for a while, AI was almost synonymous with NVIDIA and NVIDIA chips. NVIDIA makes the most powerful chips to develop AI. They have a 90% market share. Can you explain a little bit the back and forth, Eva, that was going on between NVIDIA and the Trump administration?
Yeah, NVIDIA has been the pivotal company in this AI race. It's the only company in the world who's able to make such advanced AI chips. And so under the Biden administration, there was a series of steadily notched up export controls targeting NVIDIA in specific, selling AI chips to China. And under this administration, at first, Trump doubled down on it and tightened the export controls even more. But then there was this reversal, an interesting reversal, where you saw sort of the free market voices sort of win out, and so now the position is that the administration is going to rethink export controls.
And Kat, when I was the Gulf Bureau chief based in Dubai for the Post, a lot of the tech story there was this tug of war between the US and China over technology related to AI. The UAE often felt like they were caught in between the two powers there. I'm interested, earlier this year, the White House eased restrictions on exporting microchips to the UAE and Saudi Arabia. What do you think the administration is trying to do here?
So the goal here is to ensure that those states are using American technology rather than technology that's coming from China. That is the argument that we've heard from the administration when we see these deals. And it's really an attempt to learn from past tech revolutions, right? There was a situation with 5G where Chinese companies moved more quickly and offered their products more cheaply to other countries, and that resulted in one of the most powerful wireless technologies being built on primarily Chinese infrastructure. And so there's a real awareness of that with the former and even current venture capitalists who are in this White House, and they are really pushing to have deals to ensure that that's not the case. And it really is a shift in some ways, even from the Biden administration. They attempted to do a little bit in this way to exert US power on the global stage, but there was a real fear of the security concerns at the same time. And we've seen this administration, once again, like Eva just said, the private industry winning out over national security concerns.
And I feel like we can't talk about the Trump administration and technology without talking about TikTok. So I want to leave some time for that. I feel like we've been going back and forth on this for months. I think there was an announcement that Oracle will now oversee TikTok's US algorithm when the sale's completed. Can you tell us more, Kat, about how we got here? And does this set up the framework for another deal on AI in the future?
Wow, how we got here is quite the long and winding road. I was talking to our colleague Drew Harwell about this yesterday, and actually the first CFIUS, the national security investigation into TikTok, actually started when Trump was president the first time, even before we lived in a pandemic and TikTok became such a popular app for so many people. And so this is really a saga that's been playing out for many years. Ironically, President Trump was the first administration to suggest banning TikTok. That was blocked in the courts. The national security concerns persisted, and we saw Congress pass a law that would force a ban of TikTok. And I mean, I can get into all the details of we've had a Supreme Court fight and many different proposals, but just this week, we have finally heard that it appears the Chinese and US governments have agreed to a TikTok deal, like you described, where there would be an American joint venture managing this app. And it's a really interesting situation where this process to ban this app that started by a law that Biden signed is now resulted in a situation where President Trump has had a lot of control and is now putting some of his key political allies in spots where they'll be on the board and have big investments in the company. And Eva actually wrote about this today in the Post.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you both so much. Thank you for being here. This concludes today's program. Thanks to all of you at home and in the room for spending the afternoon with us. And for those who are here in person, you can please join us for a reception just outside this space. I'm Susanna George. Thanks all and have a good night.